In the spring of 2017, a team of physicists pointed a set of detectors at the largest man-made structure on Earth and found something that shouldn't have been there. Not a hidden room full of gold, not a pharaoh's cursed treasure. Something stranger, a void, a massive empty space, at least 30 meters long, sitting above the grand gallery of the Great Pyramid of Giza, sealed off from every known passage, untouched by human hands for over 4,500 years. No door, no entrance, no way in. And to this day, in 2026, nobody has stepped inside it. Nobody knows what's there. And the people who could authorize a way in have refused to let anyone try. That's not a legend from a dusty scroll. That happened in our lifetime. And it's just the most recent chapter in a mystery that has been quietly covered up, argued over, and left deliberately unresolved for 200 years. This is the story of the Great Pyramid, and why, after 2 centuries of digging, scanning, and studying, we still don't actually know how it was built, who built it, or what's hiding inside it. Not because the evidence isn't there, but because almost every time someone gets close to an answer, something stops the investigation cold. Let's start with the basic problem nobody likes to admit out loud. We have no construction plans for the Great Pyramid. None. Not a single blueprint, ledger, or first-hand account from anyone who actually built it has ever been found. Everything we think we know about how it went up comes from indirect evidence, guesswork, and one Greek tourist who showed up 2,000 years after the fact and wrote down what local guides told him. That tourist was Herodotus, writing around 450 BC. The Great Pyramid was already ancient history to him, the way the fall of Rome is ancient history to us. He reported that it took 20 years to build and that 100,000 men labored on it in rotating shifts. For centuries, that number got repeated as fact in textbook after textbook. But modern archaeologists digging at the workers' village near the pyramids in the 1990s found something that didn't match the story at all. They found a purpose-built town with bakeries, breweries, medical facilities, and organized housing for a workforce that appears to have numbered in the thousands, not 100,000. Skilled laborers, not slaves. Men with broken bones that had been set and healed, meaning someone cared enough to treat their injuries. That single discovery quietly overturned a 2,000-year-old story that Hollywood, textbooks, and popular culture had repeated as unquestioned fact, and yet most people have still never heard about it. So if Herodotus was wrong about who built it, what else might be wrong? That question is exactly where things start to get uncomfortable, because the how is even murkier than the who. Here's what we know for certain. The Great Pyramid contains roughly 3 million blocks of stone, some weighing as much as 80 tons, moved without pulleys, without the wheel in any practical form, without iron tools capable of cutting granite efficiently. It was built to an accuracy that modern construction crews with laser levels and GPS still find difficult to match. The base is level to within about 2 centimeters across a footprint larger than 9 football fields. Its 4 sides are aligned to true north with an accuracy of 3/60ths of a degree, more precise than most buildings constructed today. Some of the joints between the stones are so tight you cannot slide a piece of paper between them. That level of precision on that scale, using nothing but copper tools, ropes, and wooden sledges, has never been fully explained. Multiple theories exist. Straight ramps, spiral ramps wrapping the exterior of the pyramid, internal ramps threading through the structure itself, lever and counterweight systems using the grand gallery. Every single one of these theories has been proposed by serious, credentialed Egyptologists, and every single one of them has a fatal flaw that another expert has pointed out. Straight ramps would need to be over 1 kilometer long and would have required more material to build than the pyramid itself. Spiral ramps would have obscured the very edges workers needed to keep the structure precisely aligned. Internal ramp theories can't account for how the heaviest stones, the 80-ton granite blocks in the king's chamber, were moved through the narrow spaces those ramps would require. In other words, the honest answer from the very people whose careers are built on studying this structure is, we don't fully know. And that admission rarely makes it into the documentaries built for mass audiences, because we don't know doesn't sell tickets the way a confident narrator does. The confusion doesn't stop at the ramps. It goes right down to the tools themselves. The Egyptians of 2560 BC did not have iron. Their cutting tools were copper, a soft metal that dulls quickly against limestone and is barely effective against granite at all. And yet inside the king's chamber sit 5 massive granite slabs, each weighing dozens of tons, cut and fitted with a precision that modern stonemasons still study today. British engineer and Egyptologist Flinders Petrie, who surveyed the pyramid in painstaking detail back in the 1880s, documented drill and saw marks on granite samples that, based on the depth cut per rotation, implied cutting speeds that copper tools of the era shouldn't have been capable of producing. Petrie himself didn't claim aliens or lost technology. He simply wrote down what the tool marks showed and left the explanation to future researchers. That future never really arrived. To this day, there is no universally agreed upon method for how the Egyptians achieved those cuts, only competing proposals involving harder abrasives, wetted copper saws, and enormous amounts of patient, repetitive labor. Now, here's where the story shifts from academic uncertainty into something that looks a lot more deliberate. In 1993, a German engineer named Rudolf Gantenbrink sent a small robot up one of the narrow shafts leading from the Queen's chamber, shafts too small for a human to enter, angled at roughly 40 degrees, running deep into the body of the pyramid. After 60 meters, his robot's camera hit something unexpected. A limestone door, carved with 2 copper handles, sitting in the exact center of the shaft, blocking the way forward. Nobody knew it was there until that moment. It had never been mentioned in any historical record. Gantenbrink expected this discovery to open the floodgates for further exploration. Instead, Egyptian antiquities authorities restricted further access to the shaft almost immediately, and a public dispute broke out over who had rights to publish and study the findings. It would be nearly a decade before another expedition was allowed anywhere near that door. In 2002, National Geographic funded a new robot, drilled a small hole through the door, and pushed a fiber optic camera through the gap. What they found on the other side wasn't a hidden chamber full of secrets. It was another sealed space, and beyond that, hints of yet another door. The shaft simply kept going, deeper into the structure, gated behind stone that someone, 4,500 years ago, had deliberately built to keep something out, or something in. In 2011, a robotics project called the JD Project sent an even more advanced device up the same shaft, equipped with a tiny camera that could bend around corners. It found faint red markings on the walls behind the door, hieroglyphic-style paint marks that archaeologists believe were left by the original construction crew, essentially graffiti from the men who built the pyramid, never meant to be seen again once the door was sealed. It also revealed that those copper handles on the door weren't decorative. They appeared functional, like something meant to be pulled or turned. Nobody has been given permission to open it since. That wasn't even the first time strange objects turned up in those shafts. Back in 1872, an engineer named Wayman Dixon, working under the direction of a British astronomer, discovered the 2 southern shafts in the first place, hidden behind a crack in the wall of the Queen's chamber that nobody had noticed before. Inside one of them, Dixon found 3 small artifacts, a bronze hook, a short length of cedar wood, and a strange granite ball, roughly the size of a fist. Those objects, now known as the Dixon relics, were catalogued, studied briefly, and then largely lost to history. The granite ball and the hook eventually turned up in the British Museum's collection over a century later, misfiled among unrelated items. But the piece of cedar wood, potentially one of the only organic materials ever recovered from deep inside the pyramid, capable of being carbon dated to settle arguments about the structure's true age, has never been found. It vanished from the historical record sometime in the 20th century, and nobody has ever explained where it went. That detail matters more than it sounds like on the surface, because dating the pyramid has always relied on indirect evidence rather than direct proof. Most of what we use to date the Great Pyramid to around 2560 BC comes from small samples of charcoal and reed fragments found embedded in the mortar between blocks. Radiocarbon dated in a study during the 1980s. Even that study found the dates skewed consistently older than the historical timeline of Pharaoh Khufu's reign by a range of decades to a couple centuries, a gap the researchers attributed to older wood being reused in construction. That's a reasonable explanation, but it also means our confident dating of the most studied structure in the world rests on a small number of organic samples and a plausible assumption, not a slam-dunk certainty. A single missing piece of cedar wood, lost from a British collection over 100 years ago, might have settled that question definitively. Instead, it's simply gone. Then came 2017 and the discovery that made headlines around the world for about a week before quietly disappearing from the news cycle. The Scan Pyramids project, a collaboration between Egyptian, French, and Japanese researchers, used a technique called muon tomography, essentially reading the shadows cast by cosmic ray particles as they pass through solid stone, to map density variations inside the pyramid without drilling a single hole. What they found was a cavity above the Grand Gallery, at least 30 meters long, comparable in size to a commercial airliner, sitting in a location no known passage leads to. The scientific team was careful, deliberately careful, not to speculate about what the void contained. They didn't have to. The internet did that for them within hours. But strip away the speculation, and you're left with a fact that stands entirely on its own merit. There is a large, empty, sealed space inside the most studied building on the planet. And as of today in 2026, no one has physically entered it. Egyptian authorities have approved additional muon and radar scans since then to try to map its shape more precisely, and in the years since, follow-up scans have suggested the void may run at a slight incline and connect to smaller adjoining cavities. But every serious proposal to physically drill toward it or send a probe inside has been denied. Why? The official answer, and it's a reasonable one on its face, is preservation. The Great Pyramid is one of the most fragile ancient structures on Earth. Despite its size, and any invasive drilling risks destabilizing chambers that have survived over 4,000 years by remaining sealed and undisturbed. Egypt's Ministry of Antiquities has repeatedly stated that any future access will only happen through non-invasive means, and that the site's preservation takes priority over satisfying public curiosity. That's not an unreasonable position. But it collides with something else that's been true for decades. For much of the 20th century, access to Egypt's most significant excavation sites ran largely through the decisions of a small number of powerful officials, most famously Dr. Zahi Hawass, the former Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. Hawass became one of the most recognizable faces in Egyptology, appearing in countless documentaries, and he was also, by his own admission and by the account of numerous researchers who worked with him, extremely selective about which foreign teams were permitted to excavate, which findings were publicized, and which theories were given a platform. Researchers who publicly floated ideas outside the accepted mainstream about alternative construction methods, about hidden chambers, about revising the pyramid's age, frequently found their access to the sites quietly restricted afterward. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a well-documented pattern in the history of Egyptology, acknowledged even by mainstream archaeologists who simply chalk it up to protecting the integrity of the site from unqualified treasure hunters. But it does mean that, for the better part of a century, the flow of information about the pyramid's deepest secrets has passed through a very narrow gate controlled by a very small number of people, with enormous incentive to keep the official story clean, consistent, and profitable for tourism. This isn't even the first era of tightly controlled access. Long before Hawass, the pyramid had already survived one of the strangest chapters in its modern history, the age of dynamite archaeology. In 1837, a British Army officer and self-taught Egyptologist named Howard Weiss, frustrated by the slow pace of conventional excavation, used gunpowder to blast his way into hidden relieving chambers above the king's chamber, chambers that had never been seen since the pyramid was sealed. Inside, he found faint red quarry marks, painted by the original construction crews, including cartouches that were later used to help confirm the pyramid's connection to Pharaoh Khufu. It was a genuine discovery, but it was also achieved by an amateur using explosives on a structure whose true engineering tolerances nobody fully understood, and the marks he found have been a subject of authenticity debate ever since, with a small number of researchers arguing over the decades that the paint style doesn't perfectly match other confirmed inscriptions from Khufu's reign. Most Egyptologists consider the marks genuine, but the fact that the argument still exists over a discovery made with dynamite in a 4,000-year-old tomb tells you something about how fragile our confident narrative about this building really is. And that brings us to a name that gets dismissed instantly in academic circles, but keeps resurfacing anyway: Edgar Cayce. Cayce was an American psychic in the early 20th century who, during a series of trance readings, claimed that a hidden library of ancient knowledge, what he called the Hall of Records, was buried somewhere near the Sphinx and would be discovered before the end of the millennium. To be absolutely clear, there is no scientific evidence supporting this claim. Cayce's predictions about a great many things failed to materialize, and mainstream Egyptology treats the Hall of Records as folklore, not fact. But here's the detail that keeps the story alive in ways Cayce's other predictions never managed. In the 1990s, seismic surveys conducted around the Sphinx enclosure, run by legitimate geologists, not psychics, independently detected anomalies suggesting cavities beneath the Sphinx's paws and body. Those anomalies have never been fully excavated or explained. The Egyptian government has permitted only limited follow-up investigation, and no conclusive findings have ever been published. To be fair to the skeptics, unexplained seismic readings are common in limestone bedrock, which is naturally full of cracks, fissures, and erosion cavities. There's no confirmed evidence that anything Cayce described actually exists down there, but the fact that a real geological anomaly happens to sit in almost exactly the spot a discredited psychic pointed to is the kind of detail that keeps this story circulating in serious research circles instead of dying out entirely. The Sphinx itself carries its own separate controversy, one that has nothing to do with psychics at all. In the early 1990s, a geologist named Robert Schoch examined the deep, rounded erosion patterns on the Sphinx enclosure walls and argued they were caused by prolonged heavy rainfall, the kind of weathering pattern that requires thousands of years of exposure to water, not the wind-driven sand erosion typical of Egypt's climate for the last several thousand years. If he's right, that would push the origin of the Sphinx back thousands of years earlier than the accepted timeline, into a period before Egypt's climate turned arid, which would mean it predates the civilization officially credited with building it. Mainstream Egyptologists have pushed back hard on this idea, and the majority position is still that the Sphinx was carved during the reign of Pharaoh Khafre around 2500 BC, consistent with everything else known about the plateau. But Schoch is a credentialed geologist, not a fringe figure, and his water erosion argument has never been definitively disproven, only argued against. It remains one of the most contested, unresolved debates in all of Egyptology, precisely because it's not coming from someone easy to simply dismiss. There's one more layer to this story that rarely gets mentioned, because it doesn't fit neatly into either the mainstream account or the mystery narrative. In the 1930s, French architect Jean-Philippe Lauer and Egyptian archaeologists began seriously studying the bent pyramid at Dashur, built under Pharaoh Sneferu, Khufu's own father, just one generation before the Great Pyramid. That pyramid changes angle partway up from a steep 54 degrees to a much shallower 43 degrees, a visible, physical record of the builders realizing mid-construction that their original design was structurally unsound and was going to collapse. In other words, the generation immediately before the Great Pyramid's builders was still learning through trial and error how to build a pyramid that wouldn't fall down. And yet, just one generation later, that same civilization produced the most precisely engineered structure of the ancient world, a leap in architectural mastery that happened almost overnight by historical standards. That's not proof of outside help. It might simply be proof of an extraordinarily fast learning curve, driven by an obsessive, resourceful, and highly organized state. But it's a genuine unanswered question that rarely gets airtime, because human beings got remarkably good at their jobs remarkably fast, isn't as thrilling a headline as Ancient Aliens, even though it's arguably just as strange when you sit with it. So where does that leave us? Strip away the fringe theories about aliens and lost civilizations, because the honest, verifiable, well-documented facts are strange enough on their own. We have a structure built with a level of engineering precision we still can't fully explain using the tools available at the time. We have sealed internal doors with functional handles that no one has been allowed to open in over 20 years. We have a confirmed, scientifically measured void the size of an airplane sitting inside the pyramid that has never been entered. We have a missing artifact, a single piece of ancient cedar wood that could have settled the pyramid's true age beyond doubt, and simply vanished from a museum collection. We have a century-long pattern of restricted access to the sites most likely to hold answers, and we have official explanations, preservation and safety, that are reasonable on the surface, but that also happen to keep the most sensitive questions permanently unresolved. Maybe that's exactly what it looks like. Careful, responsible archaeology, protecting an irreplaceable structure from reckless drilling by treasure hunters and conspiracy theorists. Or maybe it's something else. Maybe there's a reason the world's oldest surviving wonder is also the most tightly gate-kept. Maybe the truth is that we've built almost our entire understanding of the pyramid's construction on assumption, tradition, and one Greek writer's second-hand notes, and admitting how much we don't know would undercut a story that's been told with total confidence for 200 years. What we can say for certain is this: the Great Pyramid of Giza has survived earthquakes, empires, looters, gunpowder, and the passage of 45 centuries, and it is still keeping secrets. A door with handles no one has opened, a cavity no one has entered, a construction method no one can fully replicate even with modern equipment, a missing piece of wood that could have answered one of the biggest questions in archaeology, if anyone could find it. That's not mythology. That's the official, scanned, measured, peer-reviewed record. The mystery isn't manufactured. Isn't. It's sitting right there in the data, waiting for someone to be given permission to look closer. Until that happens, the oldest structure on Earth remains exactly what it's always been. Not just a tomb, a locked door we still haven't been allowed to open. If this kind of hidden history is the kind of thing you can't stop thinking about, hit subscribe, because this is only the beginning of what's buried in plain sight.